I am no longer in charge of this business. There are higher powers and forces than me running this show now. However, I have fully assented to allow through what wants to come through. And that's what brings us here today, beloved. So I've been running Soul Tour for 8 years, Empires of the Soul for 3 years. In that time, I have touched the lives of 57,000 women, helping them be their big selves and do their big dreams. Most recently, focusing on helping them create alignment first businesses that reclaim their sovereignty and free up their lives. And very, very commonly, I am asked by these brilliant women who are very advanced and expert in their own subject matter or their own profession, but are baby beginners in mine, right? They are beginners at business, or they are beginners at at understanding the deep first principles of self-liberation. I'm very commonly asked by these brilliant beginners how they might find the time, the clarity of mind, the focus, the executive function to make executive decisions, or the energy to break their old patterns of playing small and shed all of that old eldest daughter, gifted child, immigrant kid, first Black, first woman to do whatever, right? All of that conditioning for the purpose of them doing the inner work of entrepreneurship, becoming their biggest selves, breathing life into those lifelong dreams. So today, I just want to answer that question. Where do you find that time? Where do you find that clarity? Where do you find that focus? Where do you find that energy? And I'm going to answer it in the most cosmic possible way, because that's what I do. All right. Here's the basis. Deep at the center of your being, there is an infinite well of power. This is an untapped universal life force that is available to every single woman who assents to the adventure of creating whatever is in her sacred contracts to be, do, have, learn, experience, or create. This infinite well of power was and has been intentionally concealed from you, from all of us, for many generations, for thousands and thousands of years. And today, we unconceal it. Recently, I discovered a work of writing by Audre Lorde, which I had never come across before in many years of studying her work. This piece of work was called The Uses of the Erotic. She wrote it in like 1978 when I was 3 years old. But I read it in 2025, and it sounded like someone had written a summary of my own work from the last 25 years. I don't believe in coincidence, so I don't think it's coincidence that I came across this work while drafting a very particular book and while working on the blueprint of the Empires of the Soul business model. Because this power source, the life force power source that this work by Audre Lorde activates within you as you read or hear her words is the exact same higher power and universal force that fuels the daily creation work of building the kind of business I call the empire of your soul. And this universal power source that Audre Lorde's words will activate within you as you hear her words, because I'm about to read them to you, is the exact same electric golden thread of pure universal life force energy and vitality and unique magic within you that is you, that we weave through the brand, the book, the business, and the beloved lick the plate life. That is what I am talking about and helping you create when I say the words empires of the soul. So if you hadn't picked up on it yet, business ain't just, business is not about, it's not just about money to me. Business is spiritual for me. And I cast the magnet that brought you here, so it probably is for you too. That might even be why all those other things you've tried to kind of get some traction in your business haven't worked yet, because they not like us. All right. So consider this transmission, part 1 of 2, on how to fulfill yourself as you came to be fulfilled, including creating the empire of your soul. So part 1 is going to be spirit, and part 2 is going to be strategy. And I'm actually going to read the uses of the erotic here. It's not that long. It's just that powerful. But I need to preface it with a little note about who you really are first. And then I will read you the uses of the erotic by Audre Lorde, and then I will end with a call to adventure directed very personally. I was gonna say from me to you, but it's actually from all that is to you. I'm just gonna let it come through me. All right, so here's my preface. The divine source, what some call God, is like the ocean, an infinite, rampaging, uncontrollable force of reckless, extravagant abundance. And you, beloved, you are a droplet of that ocean. You are a droplet of the limitless love, the infinite intelligence, the creative power that formed all worlds. You are not just made by God, you are made of God. That's what you are. The Reverend Dr. Audre Lorde named the highest vibrational thread of these energies, the molten, glowing, golden, liquid thread of electricity that runs just through the deepest realm of the inner pipeline within all women as they unfurl into their highest good. She identified and named this power as the erotic. But don't be scared. Because it is only the lie of those who seek to enslave your life force power for their benefit and put you and your genius into hourly containers and make you and your genius into cogs to build their empires. It is only the lie of those that have created this lie of culture that says that the erotic is like a porn thing or even a sex thing, that it's a feeling you get to, maybe it's permissible for you to feel it like once a month if you're lucky, and then you turn it back off so you can, put your pantsuit back on and go back to work for them, right? The erotic is not just a feeling to feel. It is an energy. It is a power source that is available to fuel a whole transcendent way of being. Not way of doing, way of being. Where instead of peaking at age 30 and then packing it in, you become timeless and tireless, birthless and deathless. You recognize your eternality and blissfully assent to the eternal journey of accessing more and more and more of the deepest levels of your true sacred self and learning how to flow all of that toward the creation, the being, the doing of whatever it is that you choose, whether that be creating a book, a brand, a business, or a beloved property, partner, family, or community. One life force, untapped, the erotic. It is vast and it wants to power every single component of your free and sovereign lick the plate life, where you, like the ocean that you came from, are not abundant in every way. You are reckless, extravagant abundance in every way. So you felt that in here. You felt what the Greeks called aletheia, that moment of like your chest cracking open because you've heard the truth. It has been unconcealed. What was concealed has been unconcealed, and that there's something, the divinity within you recognizes it and kind of like cracks open. So I'm sure you're wondering what happened, right? What happened? Why are so many women living with one foot on the gas and the other foot on the brakes of their very own biggest self and their very own biggest, most delicious dreams? Well, now I'm going to read you the uses of the erotic as power by Audre Lorde. Again, written, this was a paper she presented at the 4th Berkshire Conference on the History of Women at Mount Holyoke on August 25th, 1978. All right, let's begin. These are the words of Audre Lorde, and I will tell you when I end her words and when I issue this benediction, call to action, rallying cry to you. Here we go. There are many kinds of power, used and unused, acknowledged or otherwise. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. In order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. For women, this has meant a suppression of the erotic as a considered source of power and information within our lives. We have been taught to suspect this resource, vilified, abused, and devalued within Western society. On the one hand, the superficially erotic has been encouraged as a sign of female inferiority. On the other hand, women have been made to suffer and to feel both contemptible and suspect by virtue of its existence. It is a short step from there to the false belief that only by the suppression of the erotic within our lives and consciousness can women be truly strong. But that strength is illusory, for it is fashioned within the context of male models of power. As women, we have come to distrust that power, which rises from our deepest and non-rational knowledge. We have been warned against it all our lives by the male world, which values this depth of feeling enough to keep women around in order to exercise it in the service of men, but which fears this same depth too much to examine the possibility of it within themselves. So women are maintained at a distant, inferior position to be psychically milked, much the same way ants maintain colonies of aphids to provide a life-giving substance for their masters. But the erotic offers a well of replenishing and provocative force to the woman who does not fear its revelation, nor succumb to the belief that sensation is enough. The erotic has often been misnamed by men and used against women. I'm going to say the erotic has often been misnamed by patriarchy and used against women. It has been made into the confused, the trivial, the psychotic, the plasticized sensation. And for this reason, we've often turned away from the exploration and consideration of the erotic as a source of power and information, confusing it with its opposite, the pornographic. But pornography, superficial erotic, is a direct denial of the power of the deep, profound erotic, for it represents the suppression of true feeling. It emphasizes sensation without feeling. The erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we've experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves. It is never easy to demand the most of ourselves, from our lives, from our work. To encourage excellence is to go beyond the encouraged mediocrity of our society, is to encourage excellence. But giving into the fear of feeling and working to capacity is a luxury only the unintentional can afford. And the unintentional are those who do not wish to guide their own destinies. This internal requirement toward excellence, which we learn from the erotic, must not be misconstrued as demanding the impossible from ourselves nor from others. Such a demand incapacitates everyone in the process. For the erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. The erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction and completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors brings us closest to that fullness. The aim of each thing which we do is to make our lives and the lives of our children richer and more possible. Within the celebration of the erotic in all of our endeavors, my work becomes a conscious decision, a longed for bed which I enter gratefully and from which I rise up empowered. Of course, women so empowered are dangerous. So we are taught to separate the erotic demand from most vital areas of our lives other than sex. And the lack of concern for the erotic root and satisfactions of our work is felt in our disaffection from so much of what we do. For instance, how often do we truly love our work even at its most difficult? The principal horror of any system which defines the good in terms of profit rather than in terms of human need, or which defines human need to the exclusion of the psychic and emotional components of that need. The principal horror of such a system is that it robs our work of its erotic value, its erotic power, and life appeal and fulfillment. Such a system reduces work to a travesty of necessities, a duty by which we earn bread, or oblivion for ourselves and those we love. But this is tantamount to blinding a painter and then telling her to improve her work. And to enjoy the act of painting, it is not only next to impossible, it is also profoundly cruel. As women, we need to examine the ways in which our world can be truly different. I'm speaking here of the necessity for reassessing the quality of all of the aspects of our lives and of our work, and how we move toward and through them. The very word erotic comes from the Greek word eros, the personification of love in all its aspects, born of chaos and personifying creative power and harmony. When I speak of the erotic, then, I speak of it as an assertion of the life force of women, of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, our lives. There are frequent attempts to equate pornography and eroticism, two diametrically opposed uses of the sexual. Because of these attempts, it has become fashionable to separate the spiritual, psychic, and emotional from the political, to see them as contradictory or antithetical. What do you mean a poetic revolutionary? What do you mean a meditating gun runner? In the same way, we have attempted to separate the spiritual and the erotic, thereby reducing the spiritual to a world of flattened affect, a world of the ascetic who aspires to numb out and feel nothing. But nothing is farther from the truth. For the ascetic position is one of the highest fear, the gravest immobility. The severe abstinence of the ascetic becomes the ruling obsession, and it is one not of self-discipline, but of self-abnegation. The dichotomy between the spiritual and the political is also false. It results from an incomplete attention to our erotic knowledge. For the bridge which connects them is formed by the erotic, the sensual, those physical, emotional, and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest and richest within each of us, being shared, the passions of love in its deepest meanings. Beyond the superficial, the considered phrase, this feels right to me. Beyond the superficial, the considered phrase, this feels right to me, acknowledges the strength of the erotic into a true knowledge. For what that means is the first and most powerful guiding light toward any understanding. And understanding is a handmaiden, which can only wait upon or clarify that knowledge deeply born. The erotic is the nurturer or nursemaid of all our deepest knowledge. The erotic functions for me in several ways, and the first is in providing the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with any other person. The sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference. Another important way in which the erotic connection functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy. Another important way in which the erotic connection functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy, in the way my body stretches to music and opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms. So every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing or building a bookcase or writing a poem or building a business. I added that. That self-connection shared is a measure of the joy which I know myself to be capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling. And that deep and irreplaceable knowledge of my capacity for joy comes to demand from all of my life that it be lived within the knowledge that such satisfaction is possible and does not have to be called marriage, nor God, nor afterlife. Now, this is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone when it's recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate these aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. And this is a grave responsibility projected from within each of us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe. During World War II, we bought sealed plastic packets of white uncolored margarine with a tiny intense pellet of yellow coloring perched like a topaz just inside the clear skin of the bag. We would leave the margarine out for a while to soften, and then we would pinch the little pellet to break it inside the bag, releasing the rich yellowness into the soft, pale mass of margarine. Then, taking it carefully between our fingers, we would knead it gently back and forth, over and over, until the color had spread throughout the whole pound bag of margarine, thoroughly coloring it. I find the erotic to be such a kernel within myself. When released from its intense and constrained pellet, it flows through and colors my life with a kind of energy that heightens and sensitizes and strengthens all my experience. We've been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. But once recognized, those which do not enhance our future lose their power and can be altered. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful. For to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance. The fear that we cannot grow beyond whatever distortions we may find within ourselves keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, externally defined, and leads us to accept many facets of our oppression as women. When we live outside ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives only, rather than from our internal knowledge and needs, when we live away from those erotic guides within ourselves, then our lives are limited by external and alien forms, and we conform to the needs of a structure that is not based on human need, let alone on individuals. But when we begin to live from within outward, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power to inform and illuminate our actions upon the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense. For as we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up, of necessity, being satisfied with suffering and self-negation and with the numbness which so often seems like our only alternative in this society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacing, depression, self-denial. And yes, there is a hierarchy. There is a difference between painting a back fence and writing a poem, but only one of quantity. And there is, for me, no difference between a good poem and moving into sunlight against the body of the one I love. This brings me to the last consideration of the erotic. To share the power of each other's feelings is different from using each other's feelings as we would use a Kleenex. When we look the other way from our experience, erotic or otherwise, we use rather than share the feelings of those others who participate in the experience with us. And use without consent of the used is abuse. In order to be utilized, our erotic feelings must be recognized. The need for sharing deep feeling is a human need. But within the European American tradition, this need is satisfied by certain prescribed erotic comings together. These occasions are almost always characterized by a simultaneous looking away, a pretense of calling it something else, whether it's a religion or a fit or mob violence or even playing doctor. And this misnaming of the need and the deed give rise to that distortion, which results in obscenity, the abuse of feeling. When we look away from the importance of the erotic in the development and the sustenance of our power, or when we look away from ourselves as we satisfy our erotic needs in concert with others, we use each other as objects of satisfaction rather than share our joy in the satisfying, and rather than make connection with our similarities and our differences. To refuse to be conscious of what we are feeling at any time, however comfortable that might seem, is to deny a large part of the experience and to allow ourselves to be reduced to the pornographic, the abused, or even the absurd. Listen, the erotic cannot be felt secondhand. The erotic cannot be felt secondhand. But this erotic charge is not easily shared by women who continue to operate under an exclusively European American male tradition. I know it was not available to me when I was trying to adapt my consciousness to this mode of living and sensation. Only now I find more and more women identified women brave enough to risk sharing the erotic's electrical charge without having to look away and without distorting the enormously powerful creative nature of that exchange. Recognizing the power of the erotic within our lives can give us the energy to pursue genuine change within our world rather than merely settling for a shift of characters in the same weary drama. For not only do we touch our most profoundly creative source, but we do that which is female and self-affirming in the face of a racist, patriarchal, anti-erotic society. End quote. Now, that felt like me. It felt like everything I've ever written. I've been writing about how we live in an anti-mastery culture forever, about how, as long as I've been writing, which was still later than when she wrote this, right? About how our deepest energies must be activated from within, about how we're not going to build the empires of our soul as long as we're making our businesses into our dementors and tormentors. They must be carriers for our life force and our joy. So now, beloved, consider yourself tuned in, tapped in, turned on to universal wisdom about who you really are and what your power source really is. You now stand on the brink of your big self, big dreams, empire era. You now have access to the highest universal powers and forces. You now have access to the deepest levels of you for the purposes of your own self-liberation and the liberation of those in your world. It is my absolute honor and life's work to welcome you to your soul tour. It is my honor, my pleasure, my joy, my life's work to call you to the adventure of building the empire of your soul. I love to break it to you that it is your universal birthright and destiny to be rich and free in every way. And right now, you are more capable than you have ever been before of being, doing, having, creating, learning, experiencing, and receiving everything this universe has for you. So I'm going to close this with just a blessing. All power to the people. And so it is. Ashe, Sat Nam. That's the end of part 1. I will see you soon in part 2.